Very interesting topic today, which is on API security and legal risk management. So just to give a little bit of highlight on the topic, as we all know that the current web today, the API contributes around 83% of the internet traffic. As we all know, the benefit of API to organization has accelerated. There has been a lot of innovations. It has adopted new business models and so on. But the growing API usage also means increasing cybersecurity risk for enterprises. Given the importance of APIs in digital transformation and the risk they pose to enterprise, it is certainly important for security compliance and audit professional to better understand API attacks and API risk. And that is what we're going to speak today. And we've got Dr. Baljeet Malhotra, uh, an award-winning researcher and a global tech leader known for his work in open source and API risk management. Um, to say a little bit more, he founded Teach Lab in 2019 and steered the team to build API discovery and security, world's first end-to-end API risk management platform. Interesting. Prior to Teach Lab, he established the R&D unit of Black Duck Software in 2016. He also served as a research director at SAP and senior software engineer at Mahindra Tech. He received a PhD in computing science from University of Alberta and won several awards including NSERC, Scholar and Global Young Scientist Singapore. He concurrently holds adjunct professor positions at the University of British Columbia, University of Victoria, and University of Northern BC. He has given numerous ISACA, ISSA, IIA, IC squared, OSAP talks globally and published several papers and patents at international venues. So with that, let me warmly welcome our speaker for today. Thank you. It's over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Jalan and Asanka and the rest of the ISACA chapter leaders at Sri Lanka chapter for warm welcome. It's really honored to be part of this chapter. I believe this is our first event with your chapter, so this is a special moment for us. So let me start with the bio, since you have already included my bio, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'll quickly skip this and maybe highlight one aspect that might be able to useful for the audiences. I'm unlike many of you that come from audit compliance background. My background is not necessarily compliance audit, but my specialization is applying data science, data management to large scale data management problems. And I've been doing that for cybersecurity related problems, licensing, security, vulnerability management, and more recently for API risk management, more so in the last 15 years or so using these data science and data management technologies. So I just wanted to disclose that to you so that you know I don't want to pretending that I know everything, and I just want this to be a dialogue. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat window, and you know if there is any question that you believe is needed for you to understand the concepts that I'm going to touch upon, kindly feel free to ask those questions through the chat window. So I have come prepared with an agenda, and this is the way I want to spend, 40-45 minutes next over the next few minutes with you. So what I want to do is for the first 15-20 minutes, I want to talk about different API ecosystems that are evolving at a global scale, and also what is the impact of those evolving global API ecosystems on enterprises. In particular, I want to talk about from a risk management point of view. I mean, specifically, this is a risk management focused group. So I want to talk about how these globally evolving systems, specifically from an API management perspective, are impacting organizations from a security point of view, from a legal point of view, and so on and so forth. Then I will spend some time explaining how we can use some of the processes and existing models for risk management to mitigate these risks that I'm talking about. And I will also share our community platform that you can leverage upon moving forward uh, for some of the concepts that I will review today with you to practice after this workshop as well. I'll try to keep some time for Q&A at the end, but actually I do not mind if you have any questions, you want to put it in the chat window while I'm presenting. And Asanka and Dylan, if you guys can monitor the chat and grab my attention if there is any question, I do not mind being interrupted while I'm presenting. So feel free to grab my attention if there is any question in the chat. So let's get started. Uh, I hope, if not everybody, then majority of you actually already know what APIs are. Um, but one distinguished feature that I want to highlight here is I'm going to talk about web APIs. APIs have been existing for decades, but web APIs, you can treat them as a service that is available as a HTTP protocol based service in terms of SOAP API or a REST API that is providing some business or technical functionality. As shown in this picture, there is an app that is connected to your app through this API. In this case, you may have a shopping cart, you may have enterprise applications, you may have social media channels and whatnot, as shown on this picture. And these web APIs are expanding and providing connectedness across our digital products and services. Either, as I mentioned, your enterprise application is talking to a payment gateway, or you have a social media channel that is connecting your sentiment analysis applications. So you name it, any application, including personal businesses, they are all connecting our digital world in a very connected way. And this is very interesting to note that they are industry agnostic. Any industry you talk about, either retail or energy sector or financial services or public sector, you name it, any industry, they are agnostic. Uh, it is pretty much the case that every company on the planet need that connectedness, connecting their products and services with others' products and services. And APIs are that interface that provide that connectedness. Another way to look at and understand this ecosystem at a global scale is to compare the growth of web APIs with the growth of websites themselves or the web itself. This blue curve that you see here is actually measuring how the web grew from early 90s all the way up to now, where the websites, which are essentially providing information, grew from hundreds of thousands to millions and perhaps billions today. APIs are philosophically the same. At the end of the day, they provide information. When you invoke an API or integrate an API, essentially that's providing you data. Most of the time, the differences you can see are because of the dynamic nature of those APIs. But still, at the end of the day, APIs are a way to provide information. It's just that because of the automation, because of the intelligence, you see more and more connectedness because machines need to talk to machines. Twitter API, Facebook API, LinkedIn API. So they provide a lot of informations underneath your applications. We, as an API management company, we are tracking the growth of these APIs. Although there is a huge gap where websites or web has already grown into billions of pages, but we are tracking these APIs into thousands. But believe it, or our intuition tells us, or research shows us that they're going to grow into millions and billions as well. So you will see this gap catching up. And you can see the reason why, IoT, smart devices, smart vehicles, smart wearables, wherever there is a data, data is already moving into the cloud, software is moving into the cloud. So this connectedness will be provided through these web APIs, and you will see these APIs growing into millions and billions, perhaps trillions in the near future as well. Another way to measure or quantify these results is the fact that the internet traffic, 85% of that internet traffic actually comes from these web APIs. I mean, this is just a mind-boggling number that tells you how important these web APIs are in terms of connecting our digital world. But this also highlights another fact that the risk that comes with the usage of those APIs are proportionally increasing as well, because each API that you build or integrate with your API with your applications or digital products and services, they are like a door to your information systems, right? So if they are not secure, they could lead to data breaches or other problems from a risk point of view. So from that global perspective, let me talk about what is the view of the enterprise API ecosystem. But before I go into that, let me take a quick pause and see if there is any question at this stage. So, Dylan or Asanka, if you have any feedback, if I'm going too slow, too fast, any feedback will be welcome.
Thank you, Baljeet. I think it's great so far. If there is any question that gets posted, I'll certainly pass them on to you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, and don't mind. I don't mind being interrupted. So just when you see an opportunity, when there is a pause, grab my attention. If there is a question, I'm happy to answer that question. So far, there is no question, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. So now let's get into the details of this enterprise API ecosystem. What do we see in a typical API ecosystem at an enterprise? If you look at the bottom, you see different applications, either software analysis tools, network analysis tools, your benchmark, your quality assessment tools, or other analytical tools. They are all connected through APIs. If you look at the right-hand side, you see API gateways, service meshes that are essentially to access control your APIs. If you look at the left-hand side, you see marketplaces. So you might be consuming APIs, or you might be building your own APIs that you're exposing through different marketplaces to your external customers and partners. So in a way, you could be either API consumer, or you could be API producer, or you could be both. If you move up in this diagram or the picture, you see different stakeholders. Developers that are building APIs, and not only just the developers, but also the security folks, the procurement team that are responsible for buying licenses or managing the vendor relationship, and also the compliance teams or M&A experts who are responsible when assets are acquired. They perform due diligence tasks. So the point I'm trying to make through this slide is that your enterprise API ecosystem may already be quite complex because of the type of APIs, the number of APIs, and also the tools and the processes that connect this ecosystem, and also the stakeholders that are part of this ecosystem. So let me jump into what kind of APIs we see into this ecosystem. So from this 30,000 feet view of an enterprise API ecosystem, let me take you inside the nuts and bolts of this ecosystem. And perhaps you will appreciate the fact that a lot of times risk management is all about uh, finding proper nomenclature around your assets, and then evolving your policies around it to govern those. And same is the case with APIs. If you have a better understanding what kind of APIs are in this ecosystem, it will help you as a compliance and audit expert to formulate different policies that you need to govern your API. So let me explain what those APIs are. So if you look at the definition or the categorization of external APIs listed on the left-hand sides. These could be APIs that you have consumed from external marketplaces or from your customers and partners for various reasons. They could be free, they could be, you might have subscribed, and so on and so forth. But external APIs could also be those APIs that you have built and put it out there for your customers and partners, and they're depending on your APIs. So external APIs could be something that you build or you're consuming or you're exposing to your ecosystem. If you look at the internal APIs, then these could be APIs, which is categorization listed in the middle. Then these could be APIs that you have built for your internal digital transformation projects. Oftentimes, as you imagine, there are different business units or different parts of the organization that needs this connectedness. There is a data, you don't necessarily want teams to exchange this data through Dropboxes or emails, and oftentimes, a more efficient way to do things are to build these APIs to enable that connectedness. But internal APIs could also be those APIs that your partners have provided to you, but they are not necessarily exposing this publicly, and they're requesting you that, look, this is an API that we built specifically for you because you asked us, because you wanted that integration, because you didn't want the heavy GUI or the dashboard that we have built. All you wanted was the intelligence that you can embed in your workflow, in your dashboard. So they build these APIs for you. But now you can imagine these are APIs that are not necessarily publicly available, but your customer, or sorry, your partner has built for you with the request that you got to protect them. So you can imagine your obligations to protect these APIs are even, if not greater than equal to what you will be having for your own APIs. Um, and and you can imagine this, the very definition of what is external, what is internal, what is free, what is public, what is paid, could be very, very confusing, but that's the state of the art. On top of this, you may have APIs that you have built, or you are consuming, that you may not actually know that they already exist. Uh, and that's possible for multiple reasons. But the two prime reasons that we have identified in our research is the usage of open source, because developers may download a GitHub library uh, for a particular technical or business functionality, not necessarily knowing there could be API integrations. Even a single sign-on API could be there, enabling Gmail or other email IDs to authenticate the user to access to a specific system. But still, at the end of the day, it might be transacting certain personal information. On top of that, companies buy companies, they acquire assets. And when that happens, you may be having APIs getting introduced to your ecosystem in a bulk, because oftentimes when we are buying companies, the SaaS products or the digital services might be connected through these APIs. So, in summary, the point I'm trying to make through this slide is that what is internal, what is external, and on top of that, some of the APIs that you may not even know exist, and this unknown or unknown APIs that you do not even know exist could actually be growing at a much greater scale that you can imagine. The reason is majority of the applications that we use or build today are built using open source. You name any application. As a matter of fact, as Dylan was talking about, uh, giving a brief intro about my bio, he mentioned Black Duck Software, which was a company that I built their R&D division here in Canada. And while being at that team, I had learned that we had learned that 80 to 90% of the applications, any application, not just hobby projects, but enterprise grade, military grade applications are built using open source. Pretty much open source has become a de facto industry standard. So when you have so much open source usage, the chances that these APIs are already part of your ecosystem is much, much greater. And if you don't even know those APIs that exist in your ecosystem, then how can you manage your security issues, your licensing issues, and whatnot? So hopefully that gave you good insight about where these risks may come from, but I'll go into more detail in my next slides after this slide. And the purpose for this slide is to give you a thought, not just that think of these APIs as digital assets that you need to manage or govern, but also look at these APIs as a challenge to your data sovereignty, data governance. They are very much part of your GRC ecosystem. And as shown on this picture, each dot, if it represents a API or a vendor, which is the actual case here in this picture, then you can imagine the data is crisscrossing various geographies on this globe. It's much easier for you to have a third-party API which is hosted somewhere outside the country, wherever that may be, but your team may not necessarily knowing where these services are hosted, because it's much easier for a team to integrate an API, which is essentially you have in a URL, you write a small piece of code around it, but that server where this API is hosted could move around at any point in time without you actually realizing that. So in summary, not only you look at APIs from a digital asset management perspective, but also as part of your data governance challenge as well. So now let's look into some of the API risks. But once again, let me take a quick pause again, and let me take Dylan's feedback. Dylan, you are still seeing my screen, right?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay, so do you see the API risk slide?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. So looks like there is not much delay. Any questions, Dylan?
No questions so far. So, if there's any questions, participants, please do write down the questions on the chat, and our speaker would be happy to answer them for you. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So let's look into the API risk. But before I start explaining what risks, let me give you some real-time examples, not real-time, but real examples of API breaches that have led to leakage of data, compromise of customer personal data, and so on and so forth. Any company, either from a social media perspective or a mobile company, or even healthcare providers, pretty much you see these examples all across different industries, and these are real examples, as I mentioned, where APIs were breached and hundreds and thousands and perhaps millions of customers whose data was compromised, and that's what unfortunately the state of the art is. And we started digging into this a little bit more deeper, and this is another example of one of the particular API breaches we caught, where this particular API was leaking customer data, customers' credit card data, not just the customer's name, credit card numbers, but also the security codes that will allow us to do the real-time transaction. So we wanted to go look more deeper inside this, and we wanted to see what kind of APIs, which industries, or what kind of problems are impacting these APIs. So what we did was we looked at the National Vulnerability Database, and as you know, the National Vulnerability Database, or NVD for short, managed by NIST, contains all kind of vulnerabilities, not necessarily just API specific. But what we did was we mined last 10 years of data or so and mapped all the vulnerabilities that we could where the API, the underlying API issue was a problem. And we focused on OWASP top 10 API specific problems, authentication, authorization, injection, and all kinds of problems. And we wanted to see what kinds of problem are affecting the APIs across different industries. NVD contains data from pretty much you know, around the globe. So what we had learned was that the authentication and authorizations are the top two problems that are affecting those APIs. As shown on this frequency column here, we that's how we were able to rank which problems are the top problems. And we did not necessarily reinvent the wheel here. As I mentioned, we took OWASP top 10 recommendations, and interestingly, in the OWASP top 10 recommendations, in the top five of their recommendations, authentication is authorization is also in their top five. In our case, it was the top two problems. But nonetheless, the summary here is what is the industry best practices, looking at the ground with more empirical results. It validated what kind of problems are impacting these APIs. And if you don't know the difference between authentication authorization, authentication dictates you get access to a resource or not. Resource here means API, and authorization tells you what level of granularity of access you get to. Just because you're authenticated, that doesn't necessarily mean that you get access to all the APIs or all kinds of data that is being exposed to those APIs. So authorization dictates what privileges you have to access those pieces of information. If you want to read more about industry best practices, I'm listing here some best practices recommended by Government of Canada. I'm actually based here in Canada, in Vancouver. You may be familiar with. So a lot of organization, not just Canada or the US, but a lot of organizations, uh, governments, nonprofit, of course, the industry, they have adopted best practices when it comes to API security, given that they are such an important digital assets that connect their ecosystem. So you're welcome to read into this and pay attention to the fact that even in their best practices, authentication, authorization are such an important topic that they have listed there as well. If you go read OWASP top 10 recommendations, you will see authentication authorization as a major topic there as well. So you're welcome to follow and look more deeper into these best practices, but I'll just continue with the rest of the presentation. Now let's look into how these API security issues can impact businesses. And the idea here is that not every API security problem, authentication, authorization, or all other problems I talked about, could have or may have the same impact on your business. For example, you may have multiple APIs, and let's say if two APIs are affected by authentication problem, do they have the same business impact? Not necessarily. That's the short answer. The reason is it really depends on what that API does, what is the nature of your business, and what technical or business functionality these APIs are providing. So that's the thought here. And once again, as a risk management expert or a compliance or security audit expert, you know that a lot of times risk management is all about prioritization. If you have hundreds of problems, then which one you attack the first? Because that's the intent here. So let me go into this into detail. So security problems, as you can imagine, you have authentication authorization, so that's easy for you to relate. There is an API, there is a authentication, so your asset is compromised itself. So that's your risk. That security breach in one of your APIs could lead to a legal impact. The reason how it can happen is, let's say you have an API that is dealing with customer data. For example, your product information mapped to different customers and the pricing and so on and so forth. And oftentimes, if this data is sensitive or private, you have an impact. Specifically, if your customers or partners are not happy about this, this could very much lead to a legal issue. And oftentimes, when such cases go to the courts, then the damages are computed based on the volume of the data that was compromised. And oftentimes I've seen firsthand, where, depending on the sensitivity of the data, even if it is like $5 to $10 per data piece, and if this data points are in millions, you can imagine the damages. You can do the math. So oftentimes, depending on the sensitivity of the data and what is the spread of that damage, this could lead to a significant legal risk. Financial risks are also somehow impacting the bottom line, but we should not simply assume that if APIs are transacting dollar value, then only there is a financial impact. Let me give you some examples. So let's say you are an e-commerce company, you have certain APIs that are enabling your shopping cart, in your on your website or whatever it is. And if this API was a credit card enabler or allowing you to transact on dollar values, if that API goes down, you can see the impact immediately on your bottom line, even if it is for a day. You can imagine that. But the question is the APIs that are transacting dollar value have financial impact? What about the other APIs? Could they have the financial impact as well? And the answer is yes. Let's take the example of a social media feed. Let's say you are a marketing company and you are taking these feeds coming from, let's say, from Twitter or whatnot, and you as a digital marketing company that provide these services, each of these feed actually has a dollar generation impact on your organization. For example, let's say you're doing sentiment analysis and these feeds are the ones that you use to do product evaluation or whatever the intelligence of that solution is. Now, if that API goes down, that is bringing you these feed, you can imagine the value that you're creating for your customers and partners. So there is a direct impact on your financial you know, a uh, direct impact on your technical functionality, and if it goes down, there is an impact on your financials. Similarly, the operational and regulatory risks are somehow difficult to understand, but they could impact your organization on a long-term basis. Let me give you examples from the operational or business continuity point of view. As I was explaining that I was part of a team which was responsible for conducting due diligence before my previous engagement. And in this particular organization, my team was responsible for conducting technical due diligence whenever we bought companies. So typically, what would happen is we would go as a technical team working with our lawyers team, finance team, when these transactions were taking place as part of the M&A activity, and we would evaluate the solution. In this particular example, and by the way, this is a real example, we had bought a company, quite a significant transaction, into $1 billion or so, where when we bought this company, we did the due diligence, all the different aspects from financials, from license management, from a vulnerability management, all those assessments were done. 6 months down the road after this acquisition, we realized that this application was choking down. And the long story short is there were a bunch of APIs in this particular application we had acquired. They were basically bringing the entire application down. And the reason was this was a SaaS company we had bought, smaller ecosystem. Now, suddenly, this was part of a larger ecosystem. So the API calls couldn't scale because simply these APIs were free, that they were integrated there. Eventually, we learned that there were roughly 5,000 different API integrations in that single product that we did not know that exist. Um, And as you can imagine, this was an operational nightmare for us. So, nonetheless, the long story short is there was no immediate security threat, there was no immediate licensing issue or licensing risk. But we had to figure this out: who these vendors are. Do we need to have a commercial agreement in place? Now, suddenly, these API calls need to scale to 5, 10, or 100 calls to perhaps hundreds and thousands of calls. So all those issues cropped up. Regulatory risks are very much similar to that, where they do not impact you on daily basis, but they impact you on a monthly basis. And part of your goal was to meet certain compliance goals, because otherwise you cannot launch this product in this specific country. And you fail to disclose third-party dependencies, specifically from a SaaS product point of view, and that delayed your product release, and led to ultimately all these issues lead to some form of financial impact. It's just that you got to prioritize which ones you need to address more. So now let me summarize what was the intent here for classifying these different API risks. We all agree that, like other products in this world, APIs as a product will be affected with different vulnerabilities or weaknesses. But once these weaknesses surfaces, you need to figure out a way to quantify, first of all, identify those risks and quantify the risk as well, and see which ones you want to target first. Because the problem here is the scalability. As I mentioned, you may have thousands of APIs across your different products and services. And when we have to live with the fact that they will be compromised, so which ones you want to address first. So this kind of exercise will help you as an audit or a practitioner from a compliance point of view to prioritize your problems accordingly. So now let's quickly build a process that will allow us to manage these risks. And as depicted on this picture, the discovery is very, very important. And you can imagine now you can start to recall some of the things I talked about in the beginning was, how finding your APIs are important, not necessarily just finding the legal security issues, but also finding the APIs that you did not know exist. And also, you have to constantly track their issues. It's not about just one time assessment. APIs could evolve. The underlying databases could change. Your policies could evolve. So you have to constantly track those APIs and alert different stakeholders. As I mentioned, not every person is interested in security issues. Some of you may be interested in the compliance aspect. What are the terms of services under which we are using these APIs? Have they changed? Where the data are hosted, uh, that are being transacted through API. So there could be different stakeholders, looking at the same problem from a different point of view. But ultimately, you have to have this kind of a process in place where you can discover, monitor, alert different stakeholders, and recommend different solutions to the problems. And one thing which I want to highlight is API discovery problem. And the reason why I want to highlight is, as I mentioned, like ISACA, there is an organization called OWASP. Their focus is on application security, mobile security, API security, and they are doing some good work. And since 2019, they had given top 10 API security recommendations as well. Since 2023, they have actually included inventory management kind of API discovery issue as part of their top 10 problems that they are recommending. So I want to highlight here that this is such an important issue that you have to address as an auditor or compliance expert as part of this journey that you will be taking forward in your organization. And a good question, which could be debatable within your teams and our organization, is go ask this question to your technical teams. Do we know all APIs across our products and services? where they are listed. I want to see what data is being transacted, who's consuming them, who own them. Are these third party? These are open APIs or whatnot. So discovery is going to be very important aspect as I mentioned part of this process. We have been championing this since 2019 or so, but it was good to see that some organizations have adopted this as a part of their top 10 recommendations. Now, another resource I want to share with you is if you are interested in exploring these APIs, looking at their issues, understanding more aspects around it, then there are certain repositories I recommend you can go, including ours, which is listed on the left hand side here. Apart from that, the other repositories are listed. You can go check these APIs, but some of them are actually many of them do not necessarily provide legal security information in their repos because the intent there could be different. These are just the repos that enable use of APIs from the marketplaces, or certain tools are there that enable you to configure APIs and whatnot. The focus is not risk management. But if you go to our repo, which is mentioned here on the left hand side, I will be actually able to give a quick glimpse of that API knowledge base to you and see if that further enriches your experience. So I'm just looking at my watch. We have roughly 15 minutes left. I want to keep maybe 5 minutes for Q&A, but I think we have some time so that I can show you some quick scenarios. Uh, Whatever the concepts I reviewed in my previous slides, I just want to give you a quick hands-on scenario so that you understand those concepts in a better way. So, but let me, as usual, let me take a quick pause and see if there is any question in the chat window or any other feedback.
Hi, Dr. Baljeet. Certainly, we do have some questions. Would you like to take them now, or would you like to finish
Yeah,
the
let's
demo and then?
yeah let's take those questions and then I can jump to the demo after that.
Right.
Let's take
So
those
there's
questions.
one question. Okay, let me read this out to you. Can API
Mhm.
security risk be completely taken care by performing a VAPT?
Can you please elaborate what VAVD is? Maybe
Right.
ask the
That's
question
vu-
quickly.
vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. So,
Oh, I see. VAPD. Okay, got it. Got it. The short answer is perhaps no. The reason why I'm saying not outrightly no and perhaps no is there are some security or vulnerability assessment tools that can provide some help. But either you take they are not designed to look for API risks, or they are not designed to build or discover those problems. And there are tools available. For example, burp suite, you can use postman to configure your APIs, but they're not going to tell you some of the security and data governance challenges I'm talking about. That's why I said perhaps no. So hopefully that answers your question, but I will show how some of the assessment tools, for example, a static analysis point of view, are evolving to provide us help for API risk management as well. Thank you for the question. That was an interesting question.
right.
Dylan, is there any other question?
Yes, we do. So, uh, so what are the tools can be used for vulnerability assessment and penetration testing? What are the tools that can be used?
So I will show one of our own tool. And as I mentioned, you can use some of these existing tools, for example, Burp Suite, to do some sort of testing, but they may not find, let's say, you may be able to do some injection test and see whether the API is performing in the same way that you're expecting. But again, the depth and breadth of those tests could not be enough for you to to look into those issues. But I'll show you some examples using my own scenarios that I've shown that I will show how some of those problems can be addressed.
Right. Thank you. Would you like to take another question?
Yeah, let's take it.
Okay. How to automate the API assessment for publicly exposed API?
That's a great question. Question did not specifically mention that. So these could be public APIs that you have built or exposed, or but they are APIs owned by you. But also there could be APIs that are publicly there, but there are third-party APIs that you have integrated in your application. So I'm going to address both those aspects. If you had built those APIs, it's perhaps easier for you to perform some benchmark against those APIs. For example, using OAuth top 10 tests, looking at their authentication, looking at their authorization, seeing what data they are transacting, looking at PII information and all that. But if this was a third party API that you have used and perhaps you did not build it, then there are certain things you cannot do because your hands are tied because this is an API that you did not build. But I'll show you certain ways you can still assess the quality uh, of those APIs before you start to depend heavily on those APIs to see whether these APIs are using some best practices or not. So that was a great question, by the way. So any other question, Dylan?
Yes, we've got one last question, which is what are some of the techniques used to discover unknown or shadow APIs? How
Yeah, great
effective
again.
are the traditional approaches like traffic monitoring or signature matching?
Yeah, though that's a great question again. I will actually give a live demonstration on that particular last question that was asked. So if you can just give me a few seconds to switch my screen. So probably you are not seeing my screen anymore um, because I'm going to switch to my portal here. So I'll be sharing my screen in a minute. I'm just switching the browser. Just allow me 1 second, please. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay, so hopefully you are seeing my screen again.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll put this link in the chat window. You are welcome to try this with me, or you can simply follow me the steps that I'm gonna take here, and see what I'm doing, and perhaps try them later. But just for your FYI, you can go to this link for a sign up. So I'm putting the link in the chat window. Where is the chat? Okay, right here. Yes. So I put the link in the chat window. You can do the sign up here, but as seen on my screen, you can either sign in using a form, a web form that is listed here, or you can simply log in using your Gmail ID or whatnot. But once you log in, you will get free access to this community platform, and I will show some of the scenarios and review the concepts that I just demonstrated or talked about. So since I already have an account, I've just signed in. And the first thing I want to show you, I'm going to cover maybe two or three scenarios quickly, uh, in 3 4 minutes, very quickly. But I think you will get the point very easily. So the first thing I want to show you as a concept, I want to categorize my APIs. I want to list them, index them in a way so that the discovery is easier for me, because discovery is not about just finding APIs that you did not know. That was question asked, but also the APIs that you already know, but you want to look at their licensing issues, your security issues, and whatnot. So for example, here I'm listing or categorizing all my APIs according to different industries. For example, this is a category of AI and data science APIs. I'm able to see what this API is, who's the vendor, their versions, where these APIs are hosted, their terms of services and whatnot. So all these pieces of information helps me make more informed decision. Not only that, but also, let's say if I want to see a quick example around one of the APIs, that a third party API that I'm integrating, for example, Twitter, uh, I can not only see what this API does, but also perhaps I want to see what's the data that will be exchanged or transacted by this particular API. So if I can quickly find that API here. If not, then I'll just take another example. Doesn't really matter. So I was trying to find a Twitter example, but I think we can take this example. So let's say you are trying to look into this particular API, and also you wanted to see where this will be hosted. uh, what will be the underlying data that will be exchanged or transacted. So here I'm showing you an example case where this API might be metadata they are exchanging, what are the different types of the tags they are going to respond, and so on and so forth. So this will enable not only for me to look into some of the examples that quickly will enable me to use this API and make more informed decision, but let's say if I want to see what are the terms of services of using this API. As you can see that here, the idea is if this API is transacting personal information, the vendor may say you can use this API in this specific way or that specific way. And some of these conditions may be evolving with time, unlike licenses that are fixed. So here you can see that this particular terms of services by Flickr changed in 2022. If you have one API, 10 APIs, you can still manage these risks. But if you have hundreds of those APIs, at least hundreds, and multiply by two at least your terms of services privacy statement, you have that many number of agreements to monitor. So this becomes a real practical issue. So we can address some of these issues, perhaps leveraging upon AI technologies that are becoming available, where we can do these assessments in advance and see, okay, tell me what are the permissions, what are the obligations, what are some of the restrictions that are stopping us from using this API. Just like security is a collective responsibility, the point I'm trying to make here is compliance is also a collective responsibility. Now, let me quickly show you. If you had a bunch of APIs that you had built internally, perhaps you want to perform certain benchmark against those APIs. So, for example, I'm just going to quickly show you this example here, where not only I want to look at these terms of services, what data is being exchanged, where the server is hosting those APIs, but also if I want to look into the assessment on those APIs from a security point of view, how secure or compliant those APIs are. I just want to show you some examples from that perspective. So here you can see that I have bunch of APIs for which I might have uh, ran some tests. For example, in this case, I'm running some security tests, OWASP top 10 tests. So here you can see that this particular API has actually failed my access data exposure test case. So this is perhaps something not good. At the end of the day, I want this report card to be clear. So think of this as a report card on this particular API. What test cases were run, how they were run. It gives you the assessment on that. Not only that, but if I want to run these assessments, somebody actually asked that question. What if you want to run some of these uh, those uh, those test cases, do penetration testing against those APIs, perhaps do some injection tests against those APIs. So you should be able to do this in a seamless fashion. So I'm showing you the benchmark tool in this system where I can run an authentication test. You can read about it, what it is. You can configure them. You can upload a fake user, fake IDs, fake API keys to do that kind of testing. Similarly, you can check the authorization, which is kind of a business logic implemented, oftentimes giving authorization to different sets of user, checking at the rate limits and so on and so forth. So the point is you want to have uh, assessed your APIs depending on, do you have the flexibility or the luxury to run all kinds of tests against these APIs. You may not be able to do this for third-party APIs because if you're doing injection test against a third-party API, they may not like it. So perhaps there are certain limitations. Last piece I want to show is, and I think we are running out of time, but if you just allow me a minute, the last piece is somebody asked this question, and I also included in my concepts when I was reviewing. What about the APIs that you did not know existed? For example, I'm going to show you one particular case where here I am giving you a bunch of applications that I've scanned where we have found certain API integrations. So the idea is to shift left. For example, this is the application that I scanned by taking from GitHub, but this not be just a GitHub application. This could be an enterprise application. The point here is, here in this particular application, when we scanned it, it's like a static analysis that I'm talking about. We discovered these API integrations. For example, in this case, in this particular library, which was downloaded from GitHub, some of the metadata, who scanned it, when it was scanned, and we found these particular integrations. For example, you can see here some Google API integrations or Twitter API integrations. So by shifting left, finding out as these applications are being built, this could be helpful to make those applications more secure, more compliant. Similarly, you can do this on the right hand side, shifting right, where these applications are already built. Perhaps you perform certain dynamic tests to discover those unknown APIs uh, to those tools. Let me switch back to my slide again. By the way, the link I shared in the chat window, feel free to sign up to the platform, use these concepts that I reviewed with you, and also get access to the resources that I talked about. Dylan, can you see my slides again one more time, or you're still seeing the browser?
The slides are visible.
Okay, great. So now on the last slide, I just want to summarize and the takeaways for today's session. Uh, so APIs are very important. You as an auditor, compliance, security, whichever role you are playing. If you have not looked into the API ecosystem within your enterprise or organization, this is the time for you to look into this. API governance is going to be key aspect of your cybersecurity programs or of your GRC programs. Unfortunately, if you have not looked into this, your posture is not complete. Your assessments are not complete without considering your API ecosystems. And I also talked about different best practices. I also talked about how API discovery is an important problem. And I also shared, a resource that our ISACA members at Sri Lanka chapter have access to. You're welcome to try this out and continue to use this for enriching your learnings.
Dr. Baljeet, are you there? I think we've lost our speaker, so please bear with us till he comes back in. Yes, he's with us now.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, Dylan. Looks like
That's okay.
yeah, was it the time limit that shut down the team?
No, not sure, but nothing happened from our end, but that's okay.
Yeah, so I was just saying that I'm done. My apologies, we ran over time. So I give it back to you, Dylan, for any questions or comments. But once again, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to meet with your chapter colleagues.
Thank you so much. So, on behalf of the Sri Lanka Isaka chapter, I would like to thank you for taking your time and talking to us on this very unique topic, speaking on API governance, the risk, what the organization need to do. We spoke about uh, API ecosystem, the external, internal, and unknown APIs. You spoke about API risk to organizations, the best practices, the impact on APIs such as the security, legal, financial, operational, and regulatory. On top of that, you also covered in terms of how do we discover APIs, and how does OSAP top 10 rate on APIs, and so on, along with the demonstration. So it's been a very insightful session. I personally have learned a lot. I'm sure others have done as well. So let me check once again if there's any questions. Right, there's no questions from the participants. So thank you everyone for being part of this webinar, and hope to connect. We hope to connect soon with another webinar. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
so much.
Baljit, once again. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Have a great night and wish you all the best. Bye bye.